Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to a post about the challenges writers have in the internet age. It's called Alone in the New Pollution. I listened to a certain song by Beck when I was young, and it didn't mean that much to me today. But today I feel like it describes my life. She's alone in the new pollution is the refrain, and that is the condition in which everyone finds themselves when their trance breaks and they no longer engage with a workplace, an entertainment device, or a community. I quit my job at a laboratory. I don't watch Netflix shows or play clicky games, and I don't really like dealing with the local school system. Strangely enough, I don't think I've ever felt happier or freer. And I feel like it's only when you fully disconnect that you truly feel free to create. It is a bit lonely, but it's also liberating. This does come with some drawbacks, of course. Whenever you create something good, it is going to be reproduced in new forms. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, after all. And when someone is copying a style or brand, you don't have much recourse to complain, and you are lucky if your expression of that style is powerful enough to be able to profit from it before an imitator with more talent or financial support comes along. At the same time, everybody is working at cross purposes, so whenever you do anything, someone else is going to view it as sabotage. They will try to undermine what you produce. If you are lucky, someone will join forces with you to create a collective movement in a fortuitous direction that brings the archetypes into better balance. If you are unlucky, that someone will copy your work without citing you. The internet has made theft of intellectual property easier than ever, and that is why my very first novel was ripped off within 4 months after I self-published it on Amazon. The thief paid a ghostwriter to produce a shorter, dumbed-down version. He self-published the result on Amazon and then purchased advertising, reviews, and Twitter followers to promote the product he had stolen. When I confronted him, he said, "There are no new stories." And some of his more honest reviewers on Amazon wrote, "Great concept, terrible execution." He thought that by shortening my story and focusing on more prurient aspects, he was making it better. Ha! I thought this young man's moral failings might be unusual, rather than representative of young people today, but I was wrong. Little did I know that a second young person was also using my novel as a template. This is something that the internet has enabled on a scale that we've never really been able to see before. It happened more slowly in the past, but now it happens more quickly. In comparison to the ghostwriter-assisted 4 months required by the young man, this young woman took 5 months to rewrite the story in her own voice, and instead of self-publishing it, she used it to find an agent who then sold it to a publishing company, which is scheduled to start selling it in March 2021, so next spring. I found this out through an announcement on a website called The Bookseller. Whereas the first thief focused on making the female protagonist pathetic and disgusting, depicting her getting ridden by an alpha male at the end of the book, the second thief focused on making the female protagonist sympathetic, and she made the relationship with her tormentor more romantic. The first thief was a young man who rewrote my book to appeal to young men. The second thief was a young woman who rewrote my book to appeal to young women. I had written the book to have appeal for a wide range of readers, and judging from the number of plagiarists, I was successful. So I will go through I know a lot of people really truly don't believe that there are new stories, that every story is just a retelling of something old. And to a certain extent, that is true. But that's only when you reduce a story down to a few elements. If you really get into the details, there are a certain number of plot elements in order after which I think you can mathematically prove that something has copied another work to a degree which is not legal. So I'm going to try to prove to you that there is an algorithm for diagnosing when someone has copied your work or not. Because a lot of times authors, you think somebody might have copied your work, but you're not really sure because you don't know how to quantify it. And I think we can make it possible for authors to quantify this. Because in this internet age, with copying being so easy, authors have to wear so many hats. They have to market their work, they have to write it, they have to edit it, and at the end of the day, they have to defend it. In the past, you didn't have to put so much effort into defending your work, but I think today authors need some tools to help them diagnose and defend the uniqueness of the product they've created. So the product I created, I've tried to break it down into, let's see, about 30 points. So I'll just read through those points and compare that to what the plagiarists did. So here are the 30 points of my plot. X comes from a broken family with an absent father. Her history is marked by tragedy, death. X lives in a big bad techno city ruled by plutocrats.
If you don't follow their rules, you're trash. X has no one to talk to because everyone is absorbed by their virtual identities. X is surrounded by people who have artificially enhanced their appearance in strange ways. X lives in a closet-sized apartment and is heavily in debt. X has a video job interview with a mysterious person. X finds out that the job is absolutely pointless in a Kafkaesque way. X finds that sexuality in the city has been warped and has trouble finding someone attractive. X spends all of her time talking with an AI or with herself. X meets her mysterious tormentor again. X tries to reconnect to her past and is betrayed by a system she chosen to trust. X loses a job and becomes desperate to earn a living. X is obsessed with her mirror images. X is rescued by a mysterious character who has been helping her. X is paid to do a job which destroys the plutocrat's property and chaos ensues. X leaves the city and sees another version of herself attacked and eaten by beasts. X has lost the ability to communicate due to what the city did to her. X literally and figuratively eats fruit from the tree of knowledge. X is tormented by her connection to the technology of the city. She gazes into a new sort of mirror which is responsible for the deaths of most of the people in the city. X remembers the past she long since forgotten through the technology of the city. She survives to look into the mirror but no one else did. She finds a replacement parent figure. She's able to see herself in a completely new light. She's taunted by she's turned into an unlikely savior. She's taunted by a mysterious individual
who had been guiding her life. She's told that he is obsessed with her because he learns from her struggles. She finds out what happened to her absent father. She chooses to run away from the mysterious person in search of something real, new, and connected to nature, etc. Okay, so those are it's very boring when you put a plot like that. The real magic, of course, is in how you tell the story. And so somebody who wants to copy someone else's plot might take those 30 plot elements and say, I can tell this story in a more compelling fashion. And to a certain degree, I kind of understand that, but I think that when the number of plot elements becomes long enough, at a certain point, you are plagiarizing. And I'd like to figure out what that number is. Is it 10? Is it 3? Clearly not 3. Is it 20? Is it 30? How many plot elements in series does it take before it's obvious that you have taken someone else's story? So in the story I just described, this character X was named Alex, and the first plagiarist renamed her Renee, and the second plagiarist renamed her Lydia. The second plagiarist put more focus on her family life and her search for romance, while the first plagiarist focused more on her relationship to a city. If I try to apply the same plagiarism standards to my own story and figure out the extent to which it has copied from earlier works, which it surely has, I discover that the story it most closely resembles is Beetlejuice, with ghosts replaced by AIs and the family replaced by a city. So if I try to analyze this, I would take the subsequences of my story that resonate with Beetlejuice, and I can combine those and eliminate those from my list in order to improve the mathematical estimate of its uniqueness. For example, points 1 through 4 would become a single point. X comes from a broken family with an absent father. X lives in a big bad techno city ruled by plutocrats. Well, in the case of Beetlejuice, she comes from a bad family ruled by parents. And if you don't follow their rules, you're trash. She has no one to talk to because everyone is absorbed by their virtual identities. She's surrounded by people who have artificially enhanced their appearances in strange ways. So this all kind of matches up with the picture of Beetlejuice. We all grew up and we transformed our relationship with our narcissistic parents into a relationship with a dysfunctional social system. And so I can go through the whole plot and find those overlaps, and I remove those and I say that, okay, I'll let this story is in the public domain. So if these people I'm accusing of plagiarism copied those plot elements in series, that's, we're both doing the same thing. And that reduces the story that I've created down from 30 unique points to 16 unique points. So now I have to ask myself, are 16 plot points in order, even when some of these plot points are quite complex, derived from Beetlejuice, for example? Can I still claim that these two people have plagiarized my plot? So I take 16 and I calculate 16 factorial, which is a number that is far larger than the number of books ever published. Now I'm talking fiction, nonfiction, all of these books. So I think that the comparison of those two numbers can give you a sense of the degree of uniqueness of a specific story and whether it's been copied by someone. So I conclude that the difference between those two numbers makes it absolutely certain that these two young people have plagiarized, they've stolen my intellectual property, even if they claim that they were inspired by Beetlejuice rather than by my work. Then I might consider that the owners of Beetlejuice intellectual property might count the number of plot elements that I've written in italics that are in my story that are similar to theirs, and conclude that I have stolen a 16-point plot structure from them. So I'm accusing these young people of stealing 16 plot points from me, but Beetlejuice might accuse me of the same thing. So my argument that my plagiarists have committed a crime seems to be falling apart, unless I want to acknowledge that I have committed a similar crime. I don't think I've committed a similar crime because my two plagiarists used the same girl science fiction city AI tormentor framework that I used, whereas Beetlejuice used a girl family ghost framework. So I think that a sufficient number of substitutions can detach one work from another, enough to avoid plagiarism. So to quantify this, I might look at, for example, Harry Potter. If someone rewrote Harry Potter with a female protagonist and replaced Hagrid with a fairy while maintaining a 17-point plot overlap, is that enough? I don't think so. People would say this is clearly the Harry Potter story. I mean, you can break Harry Potter down into say, 20 plot points or more. And if all of those are in order, even if there's a female protagonist and Hagrid is a fairy, you'd still say, this is Harry Potter, obviously. However, if someone took Harry Potter and rewrote it such that it took place on a space station and magic was replaced with technology, I think that might be enough. I mean, if you do a careful plot analysis of Ender's Game, you might actually see 16 points of plot overlap with Harry Potter, but they're in different worlds. So that seems like it's enough. You probably are still skeptical of my analysis, but I think you would, if you think for a second about how recognizable the Harry Potter plot is after only 17 plot points, you see that there is something about a unique story structure. And I think it can be, I think the cutoff is around like 17 plot points, 16 plot points. And it's absolutely certain that you can filter out subplots and identify other works that have used them in a similar order. But as the number of plot elements grows, so does the uniqueness. So Harry Potter in 20 points, with each point broken up into between 3 and 5 points each, sounds like this. So it's kind of like you're turning a plot into a sentence. A word has, say, 3 to 5 or more syllables, and those are the words of the plot, and then those plot elements are strung together like a string of pearls, and if they are in a specific order, you say, this is a recognizable plot. You can't, that has a certain uniqueness factor. So Harry Potter would sound like, wizard leaves orphan baby with relatives. That's 5 points, and then you can string 3 to 5 points together into an 18-point or 20-point plot. So wizard leaves orphan baby with relatives, child is neglected, child has magical powers, child is sent an invitation to a special school, the invitation is ignored by relatives, child is picked up by a giant and brought to school, child gets a magic wand and an animal, child makes friends with a boy and a girl, child has stern professors in magical subjects, one of the professors is new to the school, child has a talent for a sport involving flying brooms. Child uses an invisibility cloak to steal information about a mystery. Child misses his parents and sees them in a magic mirror. Child helps giant find some scary creatures in the forest. Child finds out that the man who killed his parents is killing unicorns in the magical forest. A troll is released as a subterfuge and the children have to defeat it. The child and friends sneak into a forbidden part of the school to stop a bad thing. Children must solve a series of puzzles involving magic and chess. Child finds out that the man who killed his parents is hiding within one of his professors. Child defeats the evil man. So clearly there are stories with some of these plot points that have been written many times, but some of the plot points are very unique, and the order in which they occur is also unique up to after a certain point. So 5 factorial is only 120. And compared to the millions of children's books that have been published in recorded history, this is a small number. But as the list goes on, the math of the situation changes dramatically. 20 factorial is 2.4 times 10 to the 18, and that means 18 zeros. Compared to the number of children's books in existence, it is a large number. So we're talking about millions, which is, 3 zeros, compared to 18 zeros. It's a huge difference. So you can argue that certain subsequences are common enough that they should be combined into a single, my nose is itchy, common plot point. But that is what I was trying to do by grouping together concepts with 3 to 5 elements. It's sort of like a word in a recursive construction of a story. So, oh my gosh, itchiness. So you have words in sentence. That's one element that can be plagiarized. I mean, everybody agrees that a sentence can be plagiarized. And if it's long enough, then you're sure that it's unique. And then you can also string together sentences in a paragraph. And even if a person spins that paragraph by changing words here and there, you still might be able to diagnose the uniqueness of that paragraph. And then you might take paragraphs and string those paragraphs together. And even if a person changes the order of the sentences within individual paragraphs, you still might be able to diagnose the uniqueness of a text, like an article length, a blog post, for example, even if those paragraphs have been altered in some individually. The argument structure, if it's long enough, you say this is unique after, say, for example, 16 paragraphs. And then you might have chapters where you have reorganized the order of the chapter. Maybe you've reversed the order of the paragraphs in some way, while maintaining the meaning contained within that chapter. And it's this recursive process where you can still have plagiarism on larger and larger length scales if you think about the structure of the text in a recursive fashion. And I think that you can diagnose this mathematically. You can mathematically analyze the genealogy of a piece of fiction, and that creating this system might be a bit tedious, but I think it's possible. You'd have to have a good database of synonyms and archetypes so that when you enter a plot like princess loses fortune to wicked stepmother and fairy godmother helps her meet Prince Charming, who makes an effort to find her and marry her, this would be automatically indexed and compared to stories indexed according to young person loses fortune to powerful bad character, and powerful good character helps her meet an attractive person who wants a future together. So you wouldn't be able to definitively say that two works that match this indexing are definitely plagiarized, but it would perhaps increase the likelihood so that if you did other sorts of searches, you might find more overlaps and identify the what's been copied and what hasn't been copied. And you might say this is stupid because, people should feel free to create and make new combinations of older works. That's what we do, and I agree with that. But we have these systems today that can do this in an automated fashion called article spinning, where they can take your work and run it through a spinner to make it unique enough that it won't get caught by an automated plagiarism detector. There's a gray area, but I think we have to start to explore it in this modern age. So the sentences I just described, young person loses fortune to powerful bad character and powerful good character helps her meet an attractive person who wants a future together. This can be reduced to as few as 10 key plot points, and 10 factorial is only 3.6 million, which is a relatively small number compared to the 130 million books published since the beginning of recorded time. But it is still a relatively large number compared to the number of novels produced each year, or even children's novels, for example. And this leads me to think that with a zooming in procedure, it would be possible to construct a simple algorithm to identify structural plagiarism or uniqueness of certain plots that are emerging in multiple publishing houses at the same time. Things are, of course, more complicated for books that contain multiple overlapping plots. You could weave a Cinderella story into a Pinocchio story, but how might you encode that? This is just 20 factorial if Cinderella and Pinocchio have 10 plot points each. But you also might consider just doubling 10 factorial. And those calculations are very different. I think that you would double 10 factorial if the author had not been able to extract new meaning from the combination of Cinderella and Pinocchio. For example, is Prince Charming also Pinocchio, and does that change how Cinderella feels about him? Is Pinocchio's nose a euphemism for something else in both stories? In that case, a calculation using 20 factorial would be appropriate. And you might be able to identify the moment when an author has created a new sort of story by breeding these two stories together, creating a new form of DNA in a biological sense. So what I'm trying to prove is that there are common and uncommon plot sequences, and one might calculate the likelihood of a certain sequence occurring through a random mutation or through a cultural leitmotif. The longer the sequence, the more unique it becomes, and I think that the cutoff for a unique sequence seems to be around 15 to 20, depending on the medium. It's sort of like a long word. And a 20-word sequence, a sentence that is identical to a sentence written by someone else, it was probably copied, especially if it contains an uncommon word. And that was what I just said right now, that was a 20-word sentence made up of about that contained 3 very uncommon words. So I can be certain that nobody else would randomly write that sentence. It's just not mathematically possible. So the plot sequence overlap with the guy who I think plagiarized my novels, it was 30 points in order. And he didn't copy any sentences verbatim, but he copied the beats of the story in order and the meaning contained therein. So it's similar to copying a 30-word long sentence that contains a few unique words. He shortened the story and he gave it a new voice, but I think that what he did was illegal. So imaginary boyfriends and AI friends were 2 elements in the story, and they are a growing cultural leitmotif. So you're going to hear this sequence again and again. And it doesn't matter that much who the first person was to use an individual idea, but if a group of ideas is used in a certain sequence or in a unique way to create a plot that strikes a new cultural resonance, I think it would be possible to detect the first occurrence of that resonance. I think it's just a matter of signal processing, or you could do some sort of DNA-like analysis of evolution of memes and such. So based on this mode of analysis, I'm going to keep my eye on another book that is going to be published early next year. It's called I, Henry, and I'm going to keep my eye on this book because every single point of the 9-point blurb overlapped with that of my first novel. So if the full text shows that there are 15 to 20 points of overlap, I think that the publisher would want to know. Because I think it's mathematically possible to prove that that level of overlap does not occur by chance, and that it is equivalent to someone who has plagiarized, say, a sentence, a 20-word long sentence, or a 20-paragraph long article, those sorts of things. And I know that it isn't common for people to try to enforce that level of plagiarism, but I think we need to figure out where that line should be drawn. If someone plagiarizes or copies 30 paragraphs in order in a journalistic article, for example, is that plagiarism? Even if they've changed the wording in the individual paragraphs? This is what article spinners do on the internet, and I think that that's probably illegal, or at least it should be. And then, yeah. So what I know is that 1 million books are published each year, and only 10% are fiction. So a simple algorithm that flags published works according to plagiarism suspicion would calculate, for example, 8 factorial divided by 100,000 would tell you that there is a 40% likelihood that if an 8-point concept does not have any obvious historical counterpart, and it emerged in 2 publishing houses in 1 year, that means that there's a 40% likelihood that one of the houses has stolen from the other. That's not a 100% likelihood, it just gives you a little something to keep an eye on. But if the number of plot points is increased by 1, say from 8 factorial to 9 factorial, then you divide 9 factorial by, for example, 300,000 for the number of books published of that type over 3 years. Then you would find that there is a 120% likelihood that if the 9-point concept does not have an obvious historical counterpart and it emerged in publishing house A 3 years after it was published in publishing house B, then A has stolen from B, and B might sue publishing house A for having stolen their plot. Now, most publishing houses wouldn't even bother with this because they know how hard it is to make money off of something, that the vast majority of the effort goes into marketing a work. But, if you've already invested a lot of money in marketing your work, for example, Harry Potter, you're going to be mad if another publishing house tries to capitalize off of your brand, which is what they would be doing if they published a similar story that people like because they like familiarity. It's like a face, If you see a face frequently enough, that face becomes familiar. It's like somebody from your family and you like that face. And if an advertiser takes your face and starts using it to market products, they're stealing something from you. It's kind of, this is your property. They can't take your face and then use it without your permission. I don't think. At least it shouldn't be like that. And then there's, of course, they can take your face and modify it ever so slightly, and there are 2 people who have similar faces. But, there are Hollywood stars who have unique faces, and you might find lookalikes, but they're not exactly the same. And if you start using something that is close enough that it is the same, I think it's illegal. So these are issues that come up when you put your own face on the internet. and make videos, and these deep fakes can take your face and make it say whatever they want. It's becoming a weird issue. And I know that this sounds kind of absolutely unhinged and like, I'm perseverating, being a crazy person. But I was trained in physics, and obsessing over details and formal systems of analysis is what we do. And the thing that started this particular bout of analysis is when I saw that a pretty 20-year-old married English woman who was in flower arrangement school, that she wrote a breakout novel, and that the blurb and the theme and focus of the novel were point for point identical to that of a novel I published 2 years ago. I reacted by taking screenshots of her Twitter feed and tracking when she wrote the book and how long it took her, because I found that people who claim to be able to write complicated books with deep meaning, that especially if they're young, it usually means they've copied it somewhere, copied it from something. So what I found is that it took her not very long to write this breakout novel, and that she'd started writing it right after I'd published a similar book that took me 2 years to write. So in her Twitter timeline, she documented 5 months of writing, and she even documented that she wrote the last 30,000 words within 6 weeks, which is pretty fast if it's a complicated novel. And then afterwards, after she finished writing it, she claimed that it had taken her 9 months to write, and that it had been brewing for a long time, and that she'd had to try to rewrite it 3 times. Even though this wasn't something she documented in her Twitter feed. I mean, it's possible that that happens, but I find it a bit suspicious. The writing pace has to match the quality. Now, if she was rehashing something known, a standard plot, and using standard stylistic elements, that might make sense. But if she was doing something truly unique and really with insight upon insight, stacked and woven together, then I think it's highly likely that she's copied a complex structure, an idea complex, from someone else. I also saw that she'd been producing 3 novels per year since she'd started writing only a few years earlier. So that's also unusual. The amount of time it takes a person to develop the ability to just churn out novel after novel, it takes time to develop those skills, especially if you are, making a breakout product. So I've written in the past about where I've looked at prolific authors and shown how those who tend to produce at a very high rate either have teams of people who are ghostwriting and helping them edit, or they have some bad habits, as in they copy a lot. So that's why I've added this author to my list of people that I'm watching, because I don't like this trend. I don't like this trend of young people spinning things and trying to profit off of it because the internet makes it so easy to fool people sometimes. And I've also found that if you are watching an author too, a good way to catch them is to check out the sorts of books they've been reading on Goodreads. This might make it easier to check for copy and paste plagiarism. My investigation is was in this case made a bit more difficult by her Twitter claim that she had beta read 32 unpublished works in the year before she wrote her breakout novel. But I still think that this can be sorted out because many of the most prolific authors today have a tendency to construct their works by copying from others, and the easiest people to copy from are those who are unpublished. And since this author has been writing 3 books per year since she started writing just a couple of years ago, I think she fits that profile. Time will tell when her first novel comes out if the publishers don't cancel it for finding their own reasons to suspect her. Another strange thing I found was that her Goodreads page was linked to that of another author, another writer in the US. So her profile was of a young British floristry student, and this woman in the US was of a South American, she had a South American name, but she was from New York. And I wondered if she was the true author of this work, or if Goodreads had just glitched on me. So is it possible that a talented older woman in New York might create an English Twitter sock puppet to make her work more marketable? Or might such an author be used to edit or ghostwrite the work of a blonder, younger, more marketable English author? I am curious about how this story will turn out. But I am frustrated, as you can tell, because my face keeps itching. And I think that if literary agents don't stop this sort of nonsense, and if publishers don't stop this sort of nonsense, who will? Amazon? And clearly not, because what you see on Amazon is that if a book is successful, a bunch of jerks will publish summaries of it, and Amazon doesn't remove them because they are not officially plagiarism, because they attribute the work. So a summary of someone else's work doesn't claim credit for the work. Whereas if a person steals your plot and doesn't say that they're writing a parody of it or a summary of it, then they're doing something illegal. But if you say explicitly, I am writing a summary of this person's work, then you're somehow legal. There are so many weird things going on in publishing today. I mean, the numbers for successful books often don't add up. So, for example, there was a book recently about a girl getting raped in South Carolina, and it sold 6 million copies. But you have to think about that. Are people really buying that many books? Or, I mean, these are expensive books. These are $15 books. Or are publishers using books to launder money? And what percentage of the industry is made up of that sort of inflation? And how is that inflation used to promote certain authors at the expense of others? Is the playing field at all fair for an author who attempts to just, go out and do it by themselves? And also, what's the deal with books that include rape becoming so successful? Why is it that that seems to be a necessary plot element to ensure the success of a book? I mean, I know it's prurient, but why is that a thing? So you can see I'm rather frustrated with this. And I ask myself what it is about stories that makes us feel so possessive about them. Because even though I don't want to feel possessive over these silly stories I come up with, I do. Because I know they emerge from the chaos within my memory, and that once you give order to that chaos, you feel a need to pass it on because you feel like you've learned something by organizing all of these thoughts. And in this process, an author convinces herself, I convince myself, that this came from something unique to me. Because the moment that this new organization emerges from a sort of blind spot, it feels a little bit sacred and it feels like it should be protected. But it's hard to distinguish the sacred from copies of the sacred because it all looks the same once a bit of time has passed. And so I just think that it's very difficult for an author today to defend their work because it's so easy for people to pick it up and rehash it and publish it so quickly that this is happening within months after an author creates something new. So our tools for analyzing this process, I mean, we had some tools, copyright tools, where publishing houses would sort these things out without any help from the author. But nowadays, authors have to do it themselves, and they have to, I'm trying to speak out about this because I'm sure that I'm not the only one this has happened to. And that the people that this happens to, they convince themselves, oh, it must not have been that unique. There are no new stories. But the truth is there are new stories. There have to be new stories. Otherwise, the stories we tell would never change, and they do change. And the people who are writing these stories are doing work. And I don't know. I just think publishing houses should be aware of that and aware of what's going on in everybody's minds, that the internet is making everything rather strange. So with that, I'd like to thank you for watching this overly long video. I feel like I should refilm it to try and make it better and take out all of the lousy parts, but when you don't take out all the lousy parts, you get a very raw product, which is more authentic. And authenticity is what is lost when people plagiarize something. So the plagiarized copy, it's less authentic. It might be more succinct, more polished, but I think it would be better to respect the work of the original author and help them polish it, rather than steal it and polish it in a new form. So I am perfectly capable of polishing this video and redoing it and turning it into a more robotic kind of presentation, a more commercial presentation. I can do that. No problem. And you can see my other videos that have that sort of style, but they lose the honesty and the authenticity that I think people need to feel like they're connected to real people rather than to a system. That we need to reinforce our sense of connection to real people, to the people in our lives, in our communities, and not just reinforce our obedience and worshipping of these system-constructed narratives which publishing houses are designed to produce. So I hope that helped you think about these issues in a new light. And if you prefer to think about things in a more efficient fashion, you just have to click on the blog post and look at the words on the page, because I personally like looking at words on the page because I can go through them so much more quickly than listening to a person yammer about it. And that's why I've done this in 2 different mediums, because some people like to hear voices and some people just want to extract the meaning from a page more efficiently. Thanks for watching. My next video will be more concise and professional.